Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this May 24th meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. This open meeting is being conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. Please note this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating via Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by a video conference. Please be aware other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full names for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people may not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use their full name or who acts inappropriately. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Bellett.
Present.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Peter Brace.
Here.
Ian Golding.
Here.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
Okay, staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And I see Chuck Larson is also joining us. Chuck, do you want to say hello this morning?
Morning. Here.
Thank you. Anticipated speakers, we have Trevor Johnson. Good morning, Trevor, from Arcadis.
Good morning.
And Devin McGee, also from Arcadis.
Hey, good morning.
Thank you. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the list of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, question, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute yourself on your phone or computer when you are not speaking. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Thank you all for joining us this meeting. Vince, do you want to put the agenda up just for a minute? So the meeting today will feature a presentation and discussion from Arcadis of their progress on the grant application that we are pursuing through the Coastal Zone Management opportunity. And that is for the Phase 1 feasibility study of the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. With the information that they've developed to date was included in the packet for members. And then we will have a couple other discussions for this meeting. We are operating a little bit constrained, so we may need to end the meeting more quickly than possible. Vince is working from home and without all of his usual resources. So let's see how we do here. So Trevor, can I introduce you to present the materials that you have developed for the CCM grant?
Sure. And do I have screen sharing capabilities?
If I may, yes.
I do, yes.
Trevor and Devin both do.
Okay, great. Yeah, so before doing that, good to see everybody again. Glad to be back. And, you know, we, I think as you're aware, and Vince, I think has kept you updated, we've been working on developing a submittal to the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management Coastal Resilience Grant Program. If you think back, I think in the fall or maybe even early winter of 2022, we discussed various options, including the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, looked at some federal funding programs as well, and through conversations that Vince and others had with representatives from the state, kind of landed on this program as being the most appropriate for the work that the work that needs to be done at this point for the priority project in downtown. So this grant is due on June 13th. I think we're in a really good place right now with a draft, but with the conversation today, and I'll pull up the draft proposal in a moment and kind of walk through at a high level the scope of work, the deliverables, the schedule, the budget. I think we'd love to have a discussion with this group. I know there's many seasoned grant writers on crack. So look forward to hearing your feedback, and I think we're in a good place with time to adjust and refine before submitting for the 13th. So with that, I'll share my screen and we can kind of walk through the document that was included in your packets. So just give me one moment here. Go to full screen. All right, can you see my screen all right? Okay, great. So a couple just sort of things to highlight before we jump in. The proposal is, it's kind of what you see. You know, some grant programs have a form that you fill out. The CZM grant is really a series of prompts that are included in the request for responses, and then a request to kind of develop a 12 or 13 page proposal, right? That 13 pages includes the cover letter, which is what we're looking at now, as well as the kind of 12 page series of information that kind of is meant to convey the justification for the project, its background, the capacity of the town and the sort of community to administer the project, demonstration of the need for the project, as well as what the project will actually include from a scope of work and schedule and budget perspective. So that's what's included here. And this is the document that would be uploaded, part of the documentation that would be uploaded to the Office of Coastal Zone Management for this grant program. There are a couple sort of categories of information that are not included here. The first is sort of a detailed budget breakdown that allocates the total request for funds across the schedule, which it's an Excel sheet that we are still developing once we've finalized kind of the budget with Vince and his colleagues. And then the other is a series of addendums that are listed at the end here. And I gather that CRAC is also assisting in developing and gathering some of these addendums. So that's much appreciated. We can talk about what those will include as we get into it. So this project, you can see here the project type. There's a number of different categories of project types that are eligible for funding under the Coastal Resilience Grant Program. This one kind of checks boxes in a couple of them. The reason that we are applying under the redesign and retrofits is that historically these projects have been eligible for slightly higher grant funds. So for example, public outreach is an eligible activity, and this scope of work does include public outreach, but we're not going to apply directly under that category. So the total request for funds is $400,000. A change to the program this year compared to earlier years is that a local match is not required. Previously, a 25% local match was a requirement to submit. This year, that has switched to an encouraged, so not required, but encouraged. So we've been talking with Vince and his colleagues at the town about what that match looks like, both from a cash and in-kind perspective. Needless to say, there's going to be an in-kind match of Vince's staff time, Chuck's staff time, Holly's staff time. So there is a considerable in-kind match that we think that the town should get credit for and will include in the budget. And then there's the question of kind of the cash match, which is still an outstanding item and will determine ultimately what the grant request is, the percentage of that total $400,000. So what is this? What are we applying for? As you all know, the CRP recommended a fairly substantial project for the downtown area, namely the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. This is a significant project that is a high priority for the town, as demonstrated or discussed in previous CRAC meetings. And also, I think, really helpfully and usefully illustrated through the Envision or Remain Nantucket survey that was recently conducted, that demonstrated that the community really feels strongly that this is a priority area for action. So building on that foundation, the goal here is to really advance that project. And there's a couple of dimensions to that. The first is to continue the momentum around community engagement that was begun during the CRP, has been continued through CRAC's work since then, and will need to be carried forward throughout really the process of implementing any sort of project into the downtown area of Nantucket. So this scope of work will include both the engagement planning and the engagement activities itself or themselves. The second dimension is before jumping into kind of detailed design or feasibility assessment, we feel that there is a need for further evaluation of kind of the phasing of the overall strategy. So we think about the project that is illustrated on the map in the CRP that extends all the way along Washington Street through the downtown and to Easton Street and into Brant Point. That's a major project, and we're able to through the CRP begin to think about, what the scale of that project is and how it might be phased, but there's more work to be done. And through this scope of work, what we would recommend is beginning with kind of a deeper dive into the risk-based phasing of the project. And if you remember to the CRP, there was several different alignments that were studied, the interior, the sort of outboard or right at the coastal edge, and then, also options that are kind of located even further along the shoreline. So those options need to be further evaluated and assessed as we move through development of what will be more detailed phasing recommendations. And what that study would be done, or what that study will reveal, is what the priority phase 1 project should be. It's likely, and what we identified through the CRP is the sort of near-term action is necessary along Easy Street. As you all know, this is a place that is of urgent risk today and will only increase in the future. Connectivity to Steamboat Wharf and to Strait Wharf, it's sort of a critical priority area for downtown. So we need to confirm that is in fact the right phase 1 project. What does that, what is the extent of that project? What does it need to be effective? And then, what are the feasibility constraints and preliminary design aspects of that? So this scope of work would ultimately, I think, in summation, kind of result in a preliminary design package for that phase 1 project that then sets the groundwork and foundation for further grant funding requests and other kind of funding approaches for finalizing the design and constructing the project. So those are the 3 major buckets, and then we can kind of go into this a little bit as we walk through. I've highlighted on this, by the way, the areas that I'll touch on most directly in this presentation. You all are familiar, there's a lot of background. I think one of the things, and I'll just scroll through this without dwelling on it, one of the, I think, things that makes this project and this proposal very competitive is just the amount of work that Nantucket has already done to understand the issues that the island faces, as well as begin planning for what to do. So, from a funder's perspective, this does not appear and is not a project that's kind of created out of thin air, right? It's a project that is grounded in multiple years of engagement, technical analysis, and planning. And having the CRP as kind of the community's roadmap that was adopted by the select board, it gives a really strong foundation for the justification and need for this project. So this is all just sort of detailing, where does this project come from? Why is it necessary? So on and so forth. So pausing here, mentioned kind of at a high level what this plan will produce. More specifically, these are kind of the 3 primary deliverables of the project. So First would be a community engagement plan that looks at kind of the full arc of what community engagement will be necessary over the implementation of this project over the next 10 to 15 years. So we have done a substantial amount of community engagement that will continue, but this project should really look beyond, the next 2 years. It should look at what engagement will be necessary moving forward throughout the life of this project, so that we don't need to continue to sort of reinvent the wheel, for lack of a better word, with respect to how we engage the community, and also give some predictability to how the community can expect to be engaged. And when I say community, I do mean sort of the broadest, that in the broadest sense, from property owners, public agencies, island, year-round residents, visitors, so on and so forth. So that engagement plan is really meant to kind of put on the table what the community engagement process will and should look like over the course of that project, and then include the engagement that will happen over the 18 months, 16 to 18 months for this project scope of work. The second piece that I mentioned is the detailed risk-based implementation phasing plan that will refine the conceptual designs that were included in the CRP and confirm the location and timing for kind of the near-term priority investments, as well as those investments that may be able to happen 5 years out, 10 years out, and so on. And then with that near-term first phase project, a more detailed feasibility assessment package that would include the technical feasibility assessment, permitting and regulatory requirements, looking at designing opportunities for nature-based solutions and other kinds of co-benefits like public realm enhancements, new open space, transportation enhancements. Often at this stage, or what this would include at this stage, is more refined cost estimates, because we're learning more. We know more about what the project will look like, what it will include, some of the more kind of technical information about subsurface conditions. So we're able to refine cost estimates. With that, we can refine our cost benefit analysis. We get into more details about operation and maintenance requirements for the project, and then developing more detailed design drawings that would be suitable really as a foundation for going after big dollars, millions of dollars for federal funding applications. And then here you can see, I mentioned the diagrams that were included in the CRP. What we have here is that diagram that shows kind of the multiple options, as well as what we have preliminarily identified as kind of the phase 1 project in the CRP. The purpose of the CZM grant would be to really refine and drill in a little bit deeper into these alternatives, what they mean, what's feasible, what's not, and then use the risk information and other considerations to get at what the first stage project would be. So the role of CRAC in this, I think there is a substantial role for this committee. Obviously, you are assisting in assembling information for the grant proposal. We are interested in your feedback on this grant proposal, but with the project itself, if funded and if successful, I think the CRAC really has a substantial role to play in leading the community engagement process and helping be the kind of out front of how we engage the community in this project that will have significant implications for one of the more important and critical and identifiable areas of Nantucket. So we do see, similar to the CRAC, or similar to the CRP, excuse me, the CRAC as kind of the citizen-led steering committee for the project. But I think there's also an opportunity for this project to be the community engagement for this project to be really co-led between the town, CRAC, and whatever technical team is brought on to undertake this work. So the project description, I won't dwell on this because I think I've already kind of conveyed what the project will include. One thing to just note as you read this, it's mildly confusing because of the way that we need to break the project apart over 2 fiscal years. Generally, a CZM grant is meant to fit within the state's fiscal year. So this is due in June. Notices of award are often made in the late summer. If the project is funding, procurement of a consultant team, that takes time. So oftentimes the project can't really get launched until September, October, let's say this year of 2022. That means that the project needs to be complete by June 30th of 2022, which is 7 to 9 months. Somebody can correct me if I did that math wrong, but not a lot of time, right? And so in this case, what we are doing is requesting a 2-year period of performance to extend into fiscal year 23, giving us a full 16-month time frame. That allows us to do a couple of things. One, this is a complicated project. Anytime you do community engagement, it really requires a certain amount of time, and we feel that this scope of work really deserves more than 9 months of study. Two, it allows us to engage the summertime population more meaningfully than we would be able to if we needed to deliver the project on June 30th, right? Thinking about how far we need to get by June 30th, or the town would need to get by June 30th of fiscal year, of calendar year 22, you would not be able to really integrate engagement with a summertime population in a way that actually influences the product of the project. So that is why we are requesting a 2-year project. The reason this makes it mildly confusing is that we then need to break each task into a year 1 and year 2. So while there's kind of 3 main buckets of work, if you will, for this grant proposal, it leads to 6 tasks that are broken apart in this budget breakdown. Is a good summary of it. So there are certain things that will only happen in year 1, and then there are certain things that are broken apart across year 1 and year 2. So for example, task 1, the community engagement planning, that'll be done in year 1, right? But the community engagement activities, there'll be components of community engagement that happen in year 1 and components of community engagement that happen in year 2. The same goes for the project feasibility assessment that will be completed across multiple years. And you can also see here how the budget is being broken down. So this is based on both kind of an assessment of what project feasibility assessment requires, which you can see here is $200,000. That's a substantial bit of money, but there's also a substantial amount of work that needs to be undertaken. 35% of the budget is dedicated to community engagement, which is, I think, really substantial, and useful amount of money for a project like this, right? 2 years, the ability to really engage throughout the preliminary design process, I think is, as we all know, absolutely vital in Nantucket, but also is going to produce a better project and better outcomes. So I think that's the majority. I'm happy to answer questions and go into this, the kind of task by task breakdown of what the project is and what the deliverables will be. These are all, open for discussion. And if there are things in the deliverables that folks really want to see or would like to see added or removed for that matter, happy to do that. I also just want to touch on the project schedule before pausing for discussion and questions. You can see in this timeline how things are broken down. I will say that this is a preliminary schedule because there's a lot we don't know, right? The town doesn't know. We don't know when the notice of award will be made. We don't know what procurement of a technical team will look like and how long that might take. So this is kind of a preliminary schedule based on what timeframes make sense for different parts of the project. This will likely shift as the project launches and is carried out. So yeah, I will pause there and happy to go in deeper on any of these components and talk through any comments or feedback.
Thank you, Trevor. I do have a question right away. Can you explain why you chose 16 months in December of 23 rather than any of the further 6 months going into 2024? It seems like we would have those extra months to to invest more time if that was useful.
Yeah. I think it is strategically short such that we have buffer at the tail end. The last thing you want to be doing is detailing your project schedule out to the final due date. As we learned with the CRP, for example, right, that these things, when you get to the final stages, there's always a lot of review. There is a need to really spend the time to make sure you get it right and take comments, right? So for the purposes of the grant application, we want to be concluding with enough time at the tail end that if we do need to adjust out further, you know, we have that flexibility, because ultimately we'll be in year 2. We do have until contractually would have until, you know, June 30th of 2023 to undertake additional work. If we schedule this out to June 30th, then you're looking at further extensions and contract modifications, which can be cumbersome and difficult to, you know, do. So that's kind of the thinking. We can adjust the schedule if we want to push it into, you know, there's budget implications, right? So you don't want to necessarily extend the timeline so far that you're, you know, changing the sort of calculus of how far the budget can go from a time perspective. But you know, this is certainly a malleable schedule at this point.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee members? Gary?
Yes, Trevor, I have one question for you. In one of the early pages that you showed us a picture of the overhead of, that's the one, yes. My question is, why did you use this particular one versus the one that's in the report that goes way out to the perimeter, which closes off the whole harbor?
You're talking about the longer term visions?
Yep.
Because if you think back to the CRP, those projects are longer term, and most of those projects are not going to be permittable under present day conditions, present day regulatory frameworks, right? And so a state regulator, a state agency is not likely to fund a project that they don't see as really fundable. There's a huge emphasis in the CZM grant program on actionable projects that are going to lead to shovels in the ground in the near term that CZM, you know, and the state can point to as we are adapting to climate change, we are making progress. And so one of the goals of this proposal is to demonstrate that, you know, this scope of work, this project is really, you know, going to lead to direct action in the relatively near term. So that's the idea here. Again, these, just as a refresher, this project here is consistent with and complementary to those longer term projects if deemed necessary, because there's always going to be a need to adapt to future high tides and you know, very frequent flooding, because those harbor wide barriers, those larger projects will always require gates and other kinds of measures that allow, you know, boating access to the harbor. And so they're not going to address tidal flooding. They can be used to address major storm surges from storms, but they won't address those kind of like everyday sunny day flooding conditions, which in the long term, this project would help address.
Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments? We did have a number of people join us as members of the public. Just a reminder to please rename your Zoom account with your full name so that we can call on you for discussion if you want to speak. Trevor, I did have some thoughts on this, and you know, let me preface those by saying I have never written a grant application, and I have certainly never funded grant applications, so I'm not familiar with the normal process. But reading through this, I found it to be sort of vague in terms of what the expected outcome was. And perhaps simply because it was written by people very close to the CRP who you know, already have familiarity with the language. And I also didn't find it compelling. I didn't see that there was a clear focus on the risks that we were facing, on the current conditions and how they were an issue, on the number of people affected. I did really appreciate the note about the workers who come over on the ferry every day being part of our community and being affected. But I thought perhaps it would be useful to point out that a tremendous number of our visitors and off-island owners are also Massachusetts residents. I didn't know if that would be considered in the grant-making process as benefiting the state on a larger scale than just the Nantucket residents. So I just didn't find it compelling. If I was looking at 100 of these, this one didn't stand out as one that was top of the pack. And I don't know if you can address that concern.
Well, I don't know if I can address it. I mean, if you have particular suggestions for what might make it more compelling as a narrative, I mean, so what I would say is there's a lot that needs to be packed into 12 pages. So I think what we can look at doing is adjusting some of these introductory sections, that kind of demonstrate the need for the project to be more compelling. So we're happy to take any specific edits or suggestions you have for kind of modifications to the language in these sections that would, I guess maybe more capture what you feel are kind of like what makes this project important to Nantucket, right? Like why is this something that the community feels extremely strongly needs to be funded and that the state should assist with? I think, that's something that in some ways I think is best coming from, it probably feels most compelling coming from folks like those on this committee, right? So we're happy to take suggestions on how to modify the language if there is a specific, comments or feedback.
Thank you. I will definitely provide some. I'm curious what other members of the committee, in particular those that are more familiar with the grant funding process, what impressions you had on a first look. Gary?
Mary, I think you have a good point there. And I think maybe it's just an addition of a few words here and there. A little bit of hyperbole is okay when we're talking about, and I see you have the word critical there at one point, but these facilities are so critical to the existence of the normality of using and living on the island that if we include somewhere in the various paragraphs suggestions about how very critical and how important these requirements will be to have modified in order to deal with the future scenarios that we are facing. So I think a little bit of hyperbole is really what we could, put in some of those paragraphs.
Yeah, I would also just, be mindful of the attachments as well, right? So we will have the CRP, we will have results from Remain's very helpful survey and other letters of support from CRAC and from other supporting organizations and individuals, right? So there's a lot of opportunity to build in some of those narrative components, which doesn't mean, Gary, that we can't make some adjustments to the body text, but I would just want to highlight those attachments as opportunities for some of the other conveying some of what you Gary and Mary, I think are talking about.
Yeah, I agree with those additional documents being very helpful and allowing you to provide more details. I just think that we need to make sure that we put our a high impact language in the first thing that they read, not buried somewhere on page 237. Yeah. Sarah, comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I think I really appreciate what you were saying, Mary, because I think all the information is here. It's not like adding a ton of stuff, Trevor. I think one of the areas where I think a lot of this can go into is that section, I think it's page 6, that says need for assistance. And so it's like, obviously that's where you make your case, like, why do we need this? But I think some of the elements in that section are actually more aligned with, like, why would we be good at this already? So like the need part, it leads with, like, you know, economic, cultural, transportation, like all those things, we know why this area is so important. But then there's some of the discussion of that we already have like several departments working on coastal resiliency. And so that's kind of proof of, like, if we have this, we already have some structure in place that works on coastal resiliency. But I don't think that necessarily feeds into the, like, why we need the assistance. So like in the section for needing the assistance, that's where that would be, to me, where we like, whatever hook there is, whatever language that compels the reader to read either the rest of, I mean, I guess they're all supposed to read all of it, but to Mary's point, all the supporting documents that we have and the letters of support and everything are very important and will have more details. But in this short section, the need for assistance, that's what, like 5 paragraphs. I think that's where we can really like put some of that language in. You know, I think all the information that's in here is important to say that we have the Coastal Resiliency Committee, we have these different departments already working in ways of capital planning and ecological restoration and hazard mitigation. And I think all that stuff's important to be in there. But I think in the need for assistance piece, maybe that's where we have the power to use some of that language. And I know that's saying that without giving you exact like verbiage to use or anything. And so I'm happy to kind of think that through and provide some input.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, one thing I'm hearing is maybe there's an opportunity to, it's probably a sentence, but something to that effect on the need for assistance into the cover letter as well, so that goes right at the sort of first thing that somebody reads is a strong statement as to why does the town need this funding, right? Why does it want to partner with CZM on this project? So that becomes then sort of the thing that leads the reviewer into finding out more.
Can I respond one more thing, Mary? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you know, I think all these details about the exact why we need, but I think reminding the CZM that Nantucket is one of the most vulnerable communities in the Commonwealth, right? Like, we're an island, and I think people tend to forget we're a very wealthy location, blah blah blah, and I don't want anyone's bias of that to dismiss what the needs are. So kind of leading with that, I think, is really where that strength is, and then the supporting documents that come and the supporting language that comes really makes the case for it. So I appreciate what you were saying about the cover letter. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Jen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. And I think so far, I think this looks really awesome, guys. The one thing I would add to it, and it's kind of echoes this idea of using that powerful language up front, is in this first page as I read through it, with these pieces that are bulleted, there's no mention of, it's just this downtown flood barrier. There's no mention of the nature-based solutions or the natural pieces or even the history of the island tied in here. And I think both of those are really powerful things that are going to push this application to the front. It's not that we're just putting up, and you guys know this, and it's later in the grant application, but we're not just putting up this hard wall. We're figuring out how to buffer the water, but also make it something that's appealing in a downtown area that has a very appealing aesthetic. I think that CZM is really going to look for those, where are the nature pieces in here? And it's later in the application, but I think pulling, again, a sentence or two in this first piece when they first read it, so it's up there at the top of, oh, they're going to stop water in this massive historic downtown while also making it a very pleasing, and maybe even a few ecological pieces built in at the same time. I just think that would go a long way with what I think CZM is looking for.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Further comments or questions? Well, Trevor, I will send you some suggestions for sure. I hope that others, if they have specific points that they think will help this stand out and be a compelling project to fund, will also send suggestions. Do we send them to Vince to send to you, Trevor, or is that the right? Okay, I'm seeing a yes.
And if I may make a request to, let's see, I'm looking at the calendar. This is due on June 13th. Vince is eager to have this completed and ready for submission by June 8th, which is a good thing to do because the state's ComBuys website can be a little bit cumbersome to deal with, and you never know what other forms or things may be necessary. So if I could make a request for any comments to come to Vince by, Friday would be great, but let's say after the holiday, so maybe Tuesday the 31st. Does that seem reasonable, Mary?
Vince, you wanted to comment on that? I thought you had a timeline suggestion as well.
Yes.
Sorry.
So my timeline suggestion to the committee members that I sent in the email with the information for this meeting was for Friday the 27th. I've just got the email in front of me now, and I called it a soft deadline of sorts, saying that it would be nice to have comments, and I said either written or you can call it to my office. I don't recommend that one anymore, by the way. I'm not feeling well. I'm under the weather. But text me, ring me, whatever it needs to happen just to get comments to me. And it doesn't matter if it comes too far after the 27th, like if it's next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But we just need to allow Trevor and Devin and the team time to incorporate those comments because the Wednesday the 8th and Thursday the 9th are the days that I want to have it in, so that I've got a buffer in case things go against me, because we've already seen it with the MVP application that went in earlier this month. It can be tricky, so we're trying to learn from current mistakes.
Technology is your friend until it's not. Okay, so that's the ask of the committee by Tuesday, the 27th, if possible, but don't hesitate to send things in a couple of days later if you have something to add. So thank you for that. Trevor, any closing comments, or did Devin have anything to add?
No, Devin's just been jotting down notes so that we have your feedback from this conversation, and which is helpful and appreciated. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing any written suggestions as well. And then we'll work with Vince to get this packaged up. Assuming too, I think some of the other, letters of support and other things that CRAC was going to develop and help assemble will also be coming together over the next couple of weeks, and we will look forward to getting this submitted.
Trevor, I remembered one other comment that I wanted to offer, especially while Jen is here to comment on my comment. And that is, if you go to the list of associated studies, I think it's the next page. Yeah, no, just that second page. Yeah, right there. The 2017 Trustees of Reservations Climate Vulnerability Assessment Coastal Properties. I did not see the relevance of that document because it talks about the Cosqueta Cotu area and nothing near downtown. And I wondered if it would be more appropriate to include the recent work that NCF has done with the trustees on Cotu, which at least involves the First Point area and speaks to perhaps the dangers of those areas being washed over and making the downtown more vulnerable. But I really didn't see the relevance of the 2017 report. And perhaps Jen can speak to the more current one.
I certainly can, Mary. And I don't know if it's just that you guys haven't seen it yet, because I think we just got it up maybe on the website to Vince, right? If we've even, yeah. So the newer project was an assessment really closely of the refuge, looking at where we might have possible breakthroughs. You can certainly add it in. I mean, the 2017 one mentions Cotu and its vulnerability. So there is some talk about its vulnerability in it. So we can maybe even just put both of them in. Yeah.
And I would also just respond to that, one of the things that CZM has indicated in their, Q&A and other comments about the program is they really they want to make sure a community is thinking holistically about resilience. And if they're funding a specific project, they want to make sure that that project isn't like the only focus of the community, that there's a larger, which Nantucket has, right? Like you are thinking island-wide, we are thinking in a holistic and integrated way about the challenges that Nantucket faces. So this list is also meant to demonstrate just the extent of larger scale thinking and activities that are taking place on other areas of the island. So yeah, I think Jen, we'd be happy to include that more recent update on and study of CO2 if it's on the website.
I think that would be great to make that available. The 2017 report, as Jen said, it briefly mentions CO2, but it's a report about all of the trustees' properties, all of their coastal properties in Massachusetts. And so, a couple of paragraphs is relevant to Nantucket in that entire report. And it just didn't seem, nearly as valuable as the more current information, let me put it that way. And Trevor, that's another thought that I had. If you can scroll down, I think it's to the needs section. Right there. So the last paragraph of that about the town's budget, would it be helpful to list some of the projects that we actually are funding ourselves in the current budget for the next fiscal year? Vince has a more specific list, but as you're saying, making sure that we're holistically addressing coastal resilience, we are funding several projects out of our own budget, and would it be helpful to list those?
I think it could be helpful. I mean, it could also raise a question as to, there's a good reason why this project is one that is most appropriate for a grant request, right? Because, because of the criticality, because of the multiple benefits, because this is really a long-term, very large-scale project that will inevitably require multiple partners coming together. We do list other initiatives and projects that the town has been pursuing. So I almost think that it may make sense, rather than putting it under the need for assistance, to list those projects on the bottom of this page here that lists ongoing activities and projects the town is working on funding, permitting, pursuing through a variety of avenues.
That makes sense to me too.
So perhaps Vince, we can work with Vince to determine which of those projects to include here.
And then on staffing, the town has put in a public outreach position that will be in service of the the Natural Resources Department, as well as others. Again, don't know if that's a very new development coming from town meeting, so I don't know if that news has reached you yet, or if it would be valuable to include here.
If I could, Mary?
Vince, yes.
Yeah, just a minor note on that. It's something that Natural Resources Department is hoping to hire on. I haven't spoken to Jeff about this since town meeting or just before it. I don't think the job description is even properly written, but I'm not privy to that. But it's very hard to include a position in a grant that isn't even hired yet. But let's see if we can work it in some way as a potential.
I think, yeah, just trying to demonstrate our commitment to public engagement, since that is such a big piece of this grant. So that this grant helps us continue our commitment. It's not the only commitment that we have. But that, if it's not helpful, if it's distracting, that's certainly understandable too. Gary.
So in line with the point that you made and that I also mentioned, I looked at my thesaurus, and here's some suggestions. We can throw some of these gems in the report. You have critical already, but critical, crucial, decisive, fundamental, and indispensable. How about those for a sampling? That's all I
Remind me
wanted
not to challenge you to Scrabble, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you for those suggestions. Anything further on this item? No, thank you very much, Trevor and Devin and your team for doing this work. Yeah, I can't imagine trying to put this together without assistance from people who know the process. So we really do appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you all again for your comments, and we look forward to pulling this together and getting it submitted successfully.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Next, Gary, you're muted, but go ahead.
One thing that the fellow who was talking to us about the grant suggested, which could be helpful, is that to the extent we do this well and we get selected for this part of it, he said it would be helpful for the next phase when we actually are going to be seeking funding to implement some of the things that come out of this study. So it's really important to us.
Yes, thank you, Gary. Okay, next item on the agenda. So discussion of the potential reassignment of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee seats that's currently held by a planning board representative to be held by an NP and EDC, a Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission representative. I sent just a brief fact sheet on those two committees through the packet to everyone in case you weren't familiar with what they are and how they're different. And this is an open question. This is not with a particular aim in mind, but when Fritz resigned his seat, he simultaneously resigned from the planning board, the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission, and the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. And I just started to think about that and wonder, if the seat on our committee would be best served by the NPNEDC rather than the planning board. And just some of the thoughts that you can take from the fact sheet. The planning board has 5 members and does not generally put those members on other committees. They have one other committee appointment besides CRAC. The Planning and Economic Development Commission has, I think, 11 members, and they do sit on a number of other committees. So there was just a question of, sort of similar to the Finance Committee, is it part of their routine to sit on other committees? The Planning and Economic Development Commission has a number of appointees from other committees, so there's a wider range of influence there. Currently, all of the planning board members do sit on the Planning and Economic Development Commission. So we could end up with someone similar to Fritz who has a seat on both commissions. Just a question of which commission they're representing officially. And the two groups have different purposes. So one of the focuses of the NPNEDC is the local area plans. The focus of the Planning Commission is more in the lines of development and zoning. So these are all just, different things that came to mind. I thought we should have this conversation to see what people felt would be the best role to not only to serve the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, but for our information to feed back into the other committee. Peter, I see your hand up. Go ahead with your comments.
Yes, thank you, Mary. After, covering that board, both those groups for years, for the newspapers, if you get somebody from the NP and EDC, if you want someone from that, then you're obviously going to specify that you don't want someone from the planning board, which means you're going to get an at-large member or someone who represents the DBW or the Concom. So I would think we want somebody from the planning board. We're going to be talking about zoning. We're going to be talking about the interface between the ocean and the people, basically. And the planning board, they plan the island. People come in, I want to build this, I need a permit. They know all that. Somebody from the NP and EDC who doesn't do planning but serves on that committee may not know the things that we need. Just like we need Matt Fee, a representative of the select board, we need someone from the planning board. I would say we need someone from all the regulatory boards that interact with us, but just a general person from the NP and EDC who represents one of the other regulatory boards or who is an at-large member may not be who we need. So I just think, yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you, Peter. Ian?
Thank you, Mary. I completely concur with what Peter has said. And so I have nothing more to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Other comments? Not seeing any. So Gary, did you have a comment?
No, but I agree with what Peter said as well, because it's the planning board that's going to be asked to approve a lot of these things. And we're always trying to make sure that when they're making these decisions, they're thinking about the stuff that we find important. And that's because it's what the planning board really does. So I think that's what I second what Peter was saying, the third.
Any other comments? Okay, if there's no appetite for change, there's no reason to do anything. So I don't think there's any motion needed if we're not changing anything. But thank you for the comments. I appreciate the clarity. It's good to know that we think we have the situation that we want. Right, next item on the agenda is the final review of our first quarterly report to the select board. So we did take the comments from the previous meeting and revise the report that was included in the packet. Are there further comments from committee members on this item? Gary? Yeah, I'm not seeing any hands or hearing any comments. If there are none, does somebody want to make a motion to adopt this and present it to the select board at their next available opportunity?
So moved.
Thank you, Gary. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sarah. Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all.
It's a good report, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mike.
Gary. So we have next on the agenda, public comments. Are there any members of the public that wish to make a comment at this time about items either on or not on the agenda? You can go ahead and unmute yourself or use the raised hand feature to let me know if you want to make a comment. Not seeing any. I'd like to postpone the minutes for today to spare Vince a little bit of extra work. And I did have some comments on them, so I wanted to put those together and submit them. May I have the committee's approval to postpone those? All right, I'm seeing thumbs up across the board. Thank you for that. For new business, I wanted to come back to actually this would be upcoming meetings. So is there anything under new business, reports from Natural Resources Department or from our other committee members? Not seeing anything. Oh, Vince?
It's only a minor note. We did have some interesting weather events in the last couple of weeks, including a torrential day where we had almost 1.5 inches of rain in about 1.25 hours. And that I've taken recordings on that. That caused flooding on Easy Street, but that was entirely freshwater flooding for the most part, as close as I could figure from upstream sources. And the other was kind of a 4-day wind event where we didn't see that much in the way of damage other than our old friend buoy number 10 returning to our northeast shore.
Thank you, Vince. Any other comments or suggestions from other committees? Okay, so under discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. So I did look briefly at the calendar for committee appointments. The select board will be making appointments to committees on June 22nd. The planning board appointment is also going to happen on June 22nd. The planning board's next meeting after that is not until July 11th. So we would not have our planning board representative appointed until July 11th. The select board appointees will be effective July 1st. So even though we are meeting on June 28th, after the June 22nd appointments, it would be with the current group of members. I don't anticipate that we would have any changes on that meeting. And then our next meeting would be July 12th. So we probably would have our planning board representative appointed on the 11th. And we would have the new appointed at-large members on July 12th. Let's see. And at our last meeting, our discussion of the changes to the select board recommendation, I'm going to ask that people submit some written suggestions for how that recommendation could be changed to Vince so that he and I can look over those and draft a new recommendation to bring back. We have a 3-week break between today and our next meeting on June 14th. So hopefully Vince and I will have a little bit of time, although he will certainly be working on the grant first and foremost, to provide a draft of that recommendation to the select board. It's not going to be a polished draft. I think it's going to be just a general sense perhaps of an outline to get started with. And that's why we'd like to get your suggestions for where we should go. There's been a lot of discussion already. But I think that anything specific that you want to send, what you think should be included, what you think can be removed or changed, all of that would be very helpful as we try and create a new document to work from. So I'd appreciate your contribution to that. And unfortunately, it's going to run about the same deadline as the CZM grant comments. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do both. The other thing I wanted to mention is the Envision Resilience Challenge. They're working in Narragansett, Rhode Island, and at an upcoming meeting, I will be mentioning one of their speaker series lectures. I watched their week 4 lecture recently, and it was fantastic. It was about working with the public to bring people on board and to get community input for coastal resilience measures. And so given our current situation with the grant and the recommendation, I highly recommend that. Go to the Envision Resilience Challenge website. It's in their speaker series, and we will include a link in the next agenda for that. But I wanted to give you a heads up in case you want to search it out yourself and watch that presentation. I thought it was just wonderful. Any other suggestions for topics for upcoming meetings? Okay, seeing none. Any final comments? Vince?
This is only minor and not directly related to the committee work, but the gate is up at Smith's Point. The gate is closed. This is primarily for birds, but it does have some nice implications to prevent beach driving and what effects that might have on sand movement. So might slow down sand just for a little while and help out the area. Thanks.
Thanks, Vince. We'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Sarah. Thank you, Peter. Roll call vote. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace, Ian Golding,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Joanna Roach. Aye. And Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in 3 weeks, and happy homework.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks, Vince.